Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here, and we are excited to welcome back the lovely wife of Dr. Burton, and that is Lindy Burton. We are excited that she is joining us again. And so we're going to get into a listener story, and this listener is a friend of mine. So they're dealing with some behavioral issues, and we're going to kind of talk about that because, they're definitely not alone, and all kids I think have some behavioral issues, right? Because kids are kids. But I think it's probably pretty common for parents to go through some of these behavioral issues that my friend is struggling with. And so we're going to talk about it. And Lindy works primarily with children. You are a licensed clinical social worker and you primarily work with children. And so this is kind of what you do every day. Is that correct?
Correct.
She's a wealth of knowledge for all things kid. So to keep everybody anonymous for this story, we're calling this little girl that we're talking about Jane. All right. So she's going to be Jane. And then we're going to refer to all of the adults in this scenario by their titles. So there's going to be mom, and then there's going to be aunt and uncle. Just so, because there's kind of a lot of moving pieces to the story. And so to help keep everything straight and to keep everyone anonymous, that's how we're going to refer to it. Jane just turned 7 and she has lived with aunt and uncle for about 4 years now. And so Jane's mom is uncle's sister. So she is aunt and uncle's niece, right? And so she originally started living with them because Jane's mom, so her bio mom, was homeless. And so that's how they ended up getting custody of her. And of course, aunt and uncle they're really good people and they want to keep bio mom included. And so they let Jane go spend weekends with her when she can, but it's not really the best situation. So bio mom lives in this really small house. There's like 5 other people, or no, there's like 7 other people in the house and 2 large dogs. It's not a great living situation. Bio mom also doesn't have a car, and so she can't drive. And so aunt and uncle have to do all of the driving. And, they're trying to do what's best for Jane, and they really have her best interest at heart. And so they have legal guardianship of her. But to add to this, bio mom has been in jail a couple of times. And so they're noticing a lot of behavioral issues. And over the last year, bio mom has really been pretty stable. And so Jane's been able to go over there on the weekends. But when she comes back, there's just all of these behavioral issues. So major temper tantrum that involves kicking, throwing, and breaking things. And she would threaten violence with other people, but she's never actually been physically violent. But a turning point for aunt was when she was threatening to burn the house down and everybody inside of it. And so she said, okay, this is a lot. We're going to get into some counseling. And they did family counseling and individual counseling. And the family counseling was really great and they really liked it. But then the counselor that they were working with, she went back to school and didn't keep any clients. And so the counselor that Jane is personally seeing, she meets at the school with Jane, which is really helpful. It's convenient for everybody that she goes to the school, but aunt isn't really happy with this counselor. She doesn't feel like she's really helping or making enough of a difference in Jane's life. And also to add to this craziness is aunt and uncle, they have 3 kids of their own, ages 7 to 13, and all of their kids are really involved with extracurricular activities. So there's a lot going on. And so they're really just struggling with these regular and almost constant behavioral issues from Jane. It's very disruptive to their family life, these constant tantrums. And from my own perspective, and I've dealt with these too. I've dealt not, as regularly, but I've certainly had these monster temper tantrums from my girls where it's like everything has to come to a halt and we have to deal with this because it's disruptive of everybody. And I've certainly had, the kicking and the hitting, and, afterwards we've been able to talk about it and how that behavior is not okay, but it just seems to be getting worse and nothing seems to be helping with Jane. And so aunt and uncle, they're kind of desperate. So That was a lot. Lindy, give me your take on it.
Okay. So first, my heart goes out to aunt and uncle because they're in a tremendously difficult position and they've really done a superhuman thing to take on Jane, as now they have custody of her. They are the ones responsible. And so I just want to give them so much credit for that and say that also I think would feel very torn because I'm sure they feel like they're shortchanging their own children in ways because Jane's going to be so demanding. So stepping back, I want to say that whenever whatever a child's behavior, their behavior is their way of communicating.
Mm.
So when sometimes we get in our head, like they're just being naughty, or I'm just need to be more firm, or they're testing me or something, they are always communicating. And so Jane's behavior is telling everyone that she is totally dysregulated, that she is completely unable to find any kind of regulation. So when you say, what helps us be regulated? When are we regulated? We are regulated when this organ is deep inside our brain, this organ called the amygdala. We are regulated when that organ is saying, you're safe. You're safe. Things
Okay.
are fine. You're safe. So we are dysregulated when that amygdala is thrown off. And that amygdala, it's like a survival organ and it controls so many things in our body. But what happens is, to start with, let's just say your most basic needs. If you're not getting fed, if you're not getting sleep, you are going to be dysregulated no matter what a loving aunt and uncle do. If you aren't getting sleep, you're going to feel out of control and act out as a child because your body doesn't have that basic level of safety, because bodies know they need a certain amount of food and sleep. And so if you were to look at it kind of on the chart of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the most basic need, we all know that, okay, if kids don't get sleep, food, and water, nothing else matters. So you want to start there. And with this case, I want to say that there is this glaring thing that comes to my mind, that is, Jane is sleeping over at a house that has a lot of people and a lot of noise and a mom who hasn't had good functioning skills. So her ability to be aware of Jane's needs for sleep or to soothe or even to keep this child safe in this situation are going to be really limited. And what the aunt and uncle are describing is every time she comes home, the behavior is worse.
Yes.
So one place you want to start, the obvious, I think, place would be, it's clear aunt and uncle want Jane to have attachment with that mom and love that mom. And as much as I'm an attachment person and an attachment therapist, and I think it's important, you always need to put safety first.
Mm-hmm.
Safety matters more for health than attachment. People who are attached, and you might think, oh, that matters more, but you've really got to meet that level of safety. Otherwise, these human bodies can't thrive. So I would suggest to aunt and uncle that they stop doing the sleepovers and instead have Jane's mom come to their house for visits. I think would be a better switch. Or the state could even get involved in doing, supervised visits as a safe place. Or if transportation's an issue, I'm thinking it'd actually be good for mom to have to make effort to, they could help her understand a bus route to get to their place or some kind of way, because I think it's good for parents to work, to put effort in for their kids, especially when they've let their kids down so much. They already have a lot of guilt. And so in this case, it's sort of like aunt and uncle are doing all the work, and mom, her child just shows up, and then there's this time and then she's gone, and mom doesn't pick up any of those leftover pieces. So that is a place I would start. I would just change it so that there aren't sleepovers, because I think that's going to help. The last thing Jane needs is that extra stress.
Okay.
And she can keep, of course, seeing mom in a safe, time-limited way where she still gets to keep connection.
Okay.
So that's a recommendation. So for anyone with your own kids, when they're having a meltdown, it is really helpful to think, wait, are they hungry? Are they tired? Because if they are, if you look at what I think discipline is about, of course, it's from that word disciple, which means to teach. We as parents, that's our job, is to teach. Our job isn't punishers.
Yeah.
Our job is teachers. You cannot teach someone when they are dysregulated. The goal needs to be to get them to regulation first. So if my kid's having a tantrum and throwing a fit in a store and I realize, oh, I forgot to get them something to eat, I want to ignore everything else and meet that first basic need is what
Okay.
So then we want to move up the hierarchy of needs. And the next issue is safety. You got to be safe to be regulated. Now, safety involves a variety of things. And of course, we don't know that the people that Jane is spending time with at that house are safe. But there's another thing that I think is not feeling safe to Jane. And that is that mom has said things probably in the past that haven't come true. And now is saying things that probably we don't know if they're going to come true. Actually, they're not going to come true because mom is saying to Jane, we're going to go move into another house. That's the other thing that bumped out.
Yes.
When mom said this to Jane, it sounds like Jane immediately started having worse behavior problems with aunt and uncle.
Yes.
Okay. And when you look at that, you can see how everything in Jane's little body is going to dysregulate around that information. Because number one, my mom is saying this. Is it true? I mean, she's said things and they haven't been true. And I have all this anger inside about everything that isn't true. But also, it could be true. And that makes me terrified because my mom hasn't been safe. It's one thing to love her, but this little kiddo at some level gets it. If I'm off with mom, boom, at some other house, who's going to make sure that I am taken care of? And finally, it is really going to push on that little kiddo's attachment with the aunt and uncle. Because just because they aren't biological parents doesn't mean they're not the primary attachment. Yeah. In this case, they are. They have been with Jane for over half her life. And the half that she remembers. They, in her experience, are the parents. And someone has essentially just said, and granted, it's a biological mom that I don't live with, that doesn't have good skills, that is saying, I'm going to essentially take you away from people who have been taking care of you and that you love. And so what that is doing for Jane is it is fracturing some of the attachment that she even has with these people, with this aunt and uncle, because in the story, like some of the things that I read, she started screaming, I hate you. Yeah, I'm going to burn the house down. All this kind of thing, because how she feels is abandoned.
Oh, okay.
You are giving me away. I am going to be leaving. And I'm furious about that. And I have no ability or skills. There's no way a kid is going to verbalize this. It's just so totally mixed up in their little bodies. So that is something I want to talk about that will really help is how these parents handle these kind of behavioral issues. So I want to get there in just a minute because I want to say finally going up that hierarchy of needs. We tend to think, oh, love is the most important thing. But actually, first you got to meet the physiological needs, next the safety needs, and then the love component. So it's just good for all of us as parents to recognize that. Just loving our kids is not enough.
Yeah.
We first make sure our kids are feeling safe. And if they're not going to thrive. So when anyone, but a kiddo like Jane, when they're having a behavioral issue, like she comes home and says, I'm going to burn down the house. It's really typical as a parent. What we tend to do is we think of our children as sort of little people, little adults. And we want to just talk to them. We want to talk them through it. And we want to help figure out what's going on. However, children don't have that self-awareness. They're incapable of it. Their behaviors, their words. And when we ask them questions like, why would you want to burn down the house? Or what are you so mad about? Or, we've done so much for you. Notice how all those things, nothing in there is going to make a child feel more safe.
Okay.
Every time we ask a question, generally, that does not help a child feel safe. What that does in their brain, the child has to go to, what is the answer to this question? They usually don't know. And their answer is, I will tell you whatever I think you want to hear. This is the reason kids lie in general. And there's a book called Nurture Shock that did a lot of research on kids that pointed out all kids lie. Most parents think their kids don't lie very much. All kids will lie. But in their mind, they're not lying. Because being a good kid and what truth is saying to my parent whatever I think they want to hear. That's what I see as a good kid. So if a parent said, did this movie scare you? And I know they let me watch it and I know they'd be upset if I had nightmares. I'm going to say, no, it didn't scare me. Not because I'm getting to some truth place, but because I think that's what I should do. And so that it's important to understand that about kids, that their little amygdalas deep in their brain fire rapidly, that life is big for a child. It's scary for us as adults. You look at the economy, you look at things out of our control. We get scared about those. Well, kids are living in a world where they control very few things, and they are the little animals in the world. And so when they dysregulate, the most important thing we can do at that moment is to help them feel safer. So I'm saying if your kid comes in and kicks you, that kid is dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, Jane comes in and, she's a kicker. She comes in and kicks. You look at our typical response would be to get loud and big. Why did you do that? And notice even when I just get loud, why?
Yeah.
How your heart will do a jump.
Yep.
Right in there, that's your startle. That's your stress response. Your amygdala is saying, uh-oh, do I need to put out these stress chemicals now? Or actually telling you to. And so what happens is the more stressed I am, the more that closes down the blood flow to the thinking part of my brain.
Okay.
And so the less I can respond to your thoughtful arguments. Like this dysregulated kid kicking when you say, hey, we've taught you that's not what we do when we're upset.
Mm-hmm.
None of that is going to get in because this little kiddo, her blood flow to her thinking part of the brain is totally shut down. She is in animal response, which is essentially, I'm going to fight.
Okay.
I'm going to fight or flight.
Right. And so, and I want to take a second to reiterate here. She kicks things, right? So Jane in particular, she hasn't actually gotten physically violent with other people. But she certainly got to the point where she'll throw, kick, hit, break things, right? Or she'll bang on the door. Aunt tries to separate Jane from the chaos and I've been there too, where it's like people are still living their lives and here's this child screaming at the top of their lungs and disrupting the rest of the family. And so you try to separate them and put them in their room and they start banging on the door. And next thing you know, you're worried that they're going to break the door down. Right. And so I've heard of this described as a child is flooded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so their emotions are just flooded. And so they've lost complete rationality. And the hardest thing for parents to do in that moment is remain calm. Because your child is flooded and it makes you feel flooded.
Yes. And when you get flooded, what's interesting, your voice changes.
Yep.
And your pupils change. And everything in Jane also picks up, oh, my parent also isn't safe, or my caregiver, my custodian parent isn't safe. And that makes a loop of making less safe. So as this child is dysregulating and screaming and making things uncomfortable, and you're right, as the parent gets distressed with that, my body's going to tighten and my voice is going to change, and then she'll be even harder to soothe. And for a child who has had attachment disruption the way Jane has,
Mm-hmm.
moving her to a room right away when she's dysregulated is going to dysregulate her more.
Okay.
And so that's why they're not seeing success, and that's why and then it escalates more. So what she actually needs is some help regulating that amygdala. And this is what I want to say to aunt and uncle and anyone listening. When your child's behavior is dysregulated, the most helpful thing you can do in that moment is to help them get safer. And there are two different ways you can do that. But either way, it takes connection with you. And so the thing to remember when my child's hard is connect before I correct.
Okay.
Connect before I correct. Because I'm going to say 99 out of 100 parents are going to, when Jane is screaming, say, stop that. We need it quiet. They're going right to the behavior. And what happens is that actually dysregulates Jane more. Just imagine, if you imagine, Liz, that you're this 7-year-old out of control, you're screaming and kicking, and I say, Jane, be quiet. Let's talk about what's going on. Notice in your body how that doesn't soothe anything. Nothing feels safer.
Okay.
Nothing feels better. So there are two things you can do to help her feel safer and better. One is to soothe her physically. And those are the things that you do for a baby that you automatically sense soothe the amygdala. Those are things like rhythmic rocking, repeated patting, low soft voice, getting down below her level so you're not towering over her, because that little animal brain senses great big as threat, down low as safety, loud voice as threat, low voice as safety, being taken to a place alone as threat, being held and rocked or just patted, my little back patted or rubbed in a rhythmic kind of way. And I can just even say something like, Jane, Jane, Jane. It comes down just a little bit because there's no blood flow going to that brain. She can't think right now. Now, she may be too wild to even approach like that. You may worry that she'd even get bigger. So the other way, so first way I can connect if it feels good, right, and appropriate is physically in a soothing manner. It's the last thing an adult is going to feel like doing or want to do.
Yep.
It takes tremendous willingness to put your own distress aside and soothe yourself, like you're going to need to take a deep breath, and then come to seeing this child is dysregulated and I can help her regulate if my body is regulated and if my voice is regulated. So I'm going to try physically if I think that will work. The other thing that I can do that is amazing, that helps soothe the amygdala, is I state to the child what I see her feeling in this moment in a neutral statement. That is called emotion coaching, or another word for it is connecting, because you're connecting emotionally. And what you do when you connect emotionally is that child is no longer alone. They are seen. So imagine you're Jane and you've just come home from your mom's where you haven't slept, and maybe there are scary people there. And then you've heard some story how you're moving away and you're just ready to blow. And typical parents might go, what happened? What's the matter? Are you upset about something? All that amps up the dysregulation. If you let yourself imagine this scenario, and who's ever listening, just imagine, and someone starts asking you questions, you actually don't feel better. But now I want you to imagine you are a little 7-year-old and your world's coming apart. You are terrified and you start screaming. Maybe you start breaking things or kicking. Now imagine that a caring adult in a soft tone like this says, you are really mad. Things are wrong and you are so upset about something. I get it. What happens in that little amygdala is it no longer feels alone. And you can bet that Jane feels alone a lot because of her circumstance.
Mhm.
And so what you're giving her is safety of connection. Because if someone can see what I'm feeling and say it, I am no longer all alone in that world. And the thing is, it's actually instinctively the last thing we want to do as adults. When our
Mhm.
kids are upset, we tend to want to say, oh, it's not a big deal, or you'll see your mom next week, or don't worry about that house thing. That isn't happening now. We try and soothe it. So we tend to try and fix with our words. And I'm not saying fixing isn't good,
Mhm.
I'm saying the order matters incredibly. And that's because of the amygdala firing. And so that the order needs to be first before I say, be quiet or stop kicking or anything. If I can get to the feeling, which is so upset, things are really wrong, that kind of thing. If I can get there, this little gal, if you can stick in that spot till she comes down, it is like salve.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
like I'm being seen. And then you don't go to the correct right away. You
Mhm.
stick with this emotion coaching, especially with kids. And this is the part where it gets challenging for parents because what are you feeling? What is the matter? What happened at your mom's house? Those questions all take your mind to a different place and are stressful.
Mhm.
So, what I'm going to say to you, parents, is when your kid is dysregulated, take a breath and look at that kid and say in your mind, what emotion is my kid showing me? What is my kid saying to me? And so, with this little Jane coming back, one thing I can say, I mean, there are a ton of things I can say that'll help. But one is, it's so hard to go back and forth. It's hard to go to mom's, and then it's hard to come here. I can see how that's really hard. And if you let that sit without jumping in with a rescuing thing, that helps the child come into regulation. And if the child is dysregulated, you can stay with the feelings first. And it's not that, you have her going around breaking lamps, but you can,
Mhm.
things are so upsetting. You really need to get that upset out of your body. And so for aunt and uncle and anyone else who has a kid who dysregulates at a time, maybe it's when they walk in from school, know
Mhm.
that and know then you want to give them permission for a way to get that energy out of their body. Things are so upsetting. Let's get wet paper towels and throw them at the wall.
Okay.
Things are so upsetting. Let's get a ball and just kick it. So doing that kind of thing, because in our society, we tend to think that some feelings are right, like happy, and some
Mhm.
feelings are wrong, like anger, distress, loneliness. And the truth is that no feeling is right or wrong. They're just giving you information. So just like we wouldn't want to take away a word out of a kid's vocabulary, we wouldn't want to take away angry because then you couldn't be a whole person.
Right.
We don't want to take away that feeling. We want to help them channel it so that when Jane gets back or something like that has happened, we want her to have an acceptable way. And it'll feel wonderful to her that aunt and uncle can see this makes you so mad.
Mhm.
But we could get these soda cans and just stomp them and scream no. And that would just be a whole different world. She gets permission to have things be mad.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, any questions do you have about that part?
So, one thing that I'm thinking of is because when a child does get flooded and they all of a sudden get very disruptive of like life around you, I can understand, especially with Jane having these attachment problems, right? So, it sounds like she probably has improper attachment to her own mom.
Yeah,
So, now it's okay, I think, to remove them, but maybe just stay with them. So, move them to a different room, but don't remove yourself because I think separating Jane she's going to feel abandonment again. She's already had dealt with abandonment issues from her mom, right? And so
exactly.
when you completely wall her off, she's going to feel abandoned by aunt, right? And so
You
it's okay to
got it.
yeah, and so it's okay to separate because I mean everybody else still has to live a life, but don't separate yourself from her, right? And
Yes.
so if you need to put her in a different room, stay in the room with her. Does that sound right?
Yes, what that flow would look like. You always want to start with the feeling.
Hmm.
I see you are so upset, and there's so much that your body needs to do. I totally understand that. So let's move to this room together where we can figure out how your body can do what it needs to do. And so that is really true. Now, Jane probably has, as she's not my client, so I can't diagnose, but there is, of course, when kids have been abandoned and then get this time with a parent and without a parent, and a lot of lying and trust gets lost, they can get reactive attachment disorder. And it makes it so it is hard for them to trust anyone. And
Okay.
so they do a lot of testing of the safe, trusted people. They will test them the most.
Hmm.
So I could see how this could be going on with aunt and uncle. And so the other thing that I feel is that I would like to talk about, it is so counterintuitive and it is so important for us to do with our own kids and with kids like Jane that you are around and dealing with, is it is very easy to want to protect this child's feelings about their parent and want to soothe them about the parent who isn't behaving. And we often end up not being truthful with these kids like Jane. It'd be very easy to one, just never even address what mom is saying and not address. There was a component in the story that you mentioned. They got this new counselor and Jane came home saying, everything's unfair. Everything's unfair.
Yes.
Okay, this is a good example of this. As parents and as his aunt and uncle, we don't want everything to be unfair. And so what we would tend to do is want to try and talk Jane out of that. But, things aren't unfair, Jane. You get the same toys as so and so, or,
Hmm.
this. We want to try and soothe them. But what that does is it makes kids not trust us,
Oh, okay.
takes away the safety, because the truth is things are unfair, and it is much more helpful, and this is counterintuitive, to actually really allow it, own it, and say it. When Jane's going, everything's unfair, this is an opportunity for aunt and uncle to become the safe place in her world by saying, you are so right. Things are so unfair. It's unfair that your mom doesn't live with you. That's unfair. And it's unfair that we're not your mom and dad, because those are two things she's really going to long for. And if
Hmm.
we don't say the things that kids are really going to long for, we hesitate because we're like, oh, that's not PC. That'll make her feel worse. But it feels so much better to have the truth called out. And if she's a child of color, like she is in this,
Hmm.
and the other kids aren't,
Yeah.
that's another thing. You got to label it. We skid around that. We're like, oh, I could never say that you're black and I'm white. That would make you feel bad. But she has eyes. She knows that what feels terrible is that no one else is seeing. So to say, and I'll bet sometimes you wish you looked like us. And little ways of acknowledging all these many, many hurts this child has will help her not be so angry at the aunts and uncles home, because there's no way in the world she doesn't wish she was one of their biological kids. There's no
Okay.
way. And the more it can't be said, the more guilty she feels about it. So when you can say it, because it's got to be the case, it really helps kids. And you just say it in a statement. It's not a huge deal. You just say, it's so hard. Because I'll bet you wish you were our kids sometimes. The sometimes gives a caveat that they can
Yeah.
throw away. And I think it's really helpful for the aunt and uncle to own if they feel like this. And a lot of times we wish you were too. That's really not fair. And for them to go through and think of all these things that aren't fair. And then that really, once you have that unfairness validated, then you can move off it.
Hmm.
Until you have it validated, many people got to say, I'll see adults in my office who never had those things validated, and they don't disappear. They just stay really sore.
Okay.
But when you can get them validated, like that's a real thing, of course, Jane. And so another thing that needs validating is it must be so confusing and scary for you to have your mom say that you're going to go move in with her.
Mhm.
Notice we're not putting mom down. This isn't bad mouthing mom. This is
Yes.
calling out that this thing that happened gets you upset. This thing that happened that you heard is confusing. And then they need to clarify. Because as her legal guardians, I think it's really important to make it clear that you're going to stay her legal guardians, that no one is taking her away from you.
Okay, yeah. Now, reconciliation is the goal. So maybe they could say it has to be safe for you to live with mom, and it's not safe. We don't know when it's going to be safe. We don't know if it's ever going to be safe, but you will always have a safe place here. Right? Does that maybe sound okay?
Yes, I didn't know if reconciliation is on the table and is the goal. Then
Mhm.
you're right, you never want to lie to a kid.
Yeah.
You never want to lie. And so this is the other thing is it'd be really easy when Jane, as she gets a little older, or even now at this time, if she brings up, did my mommy do bad things? Or, did my mommy go to jail? Those kind of things. It's really important to be honest because if you lie to that child, they will lose the most precious thing they've built with you, which is the trust.
Mhm.
And so it's important to answer the questions truthfully so the child knows no matter what, these trusted people are always going to tell me the truth. And that means there are people in the world that no matter how bad things get, they'll tell me the truth. Because notice that is not a skill set that the bio mom has right now.
Mhm.
We're going to move to this house and go live there together. I mean, that might be a someday, but that's
Yeah.
a way off on this kid's horizon. So again, you want to get to all the feelings that brings up if you can as an aunt and uncle around that, because that's a really big piece of information. And those feelings would be part of you must be so excited that your mom said that. And part of you might feel really mad because of course you wouldn't want to leave here. And just acknowledging those feelings. And then I agree with you that the idea is to let her know now that wouldn't be safe to do, and we would never let that happen, and no one would ever let that happen unless things were really safe.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. So I want to go back to this. So back to Jane's current counselor, because I think that's something that it probably parents often go through and it can kind of be challenging. And so as you mentioned before, Jane is a child of color and her counselor is also a woman of color. And so that helped Jane bond with her really quickly
Mm-hmm.
because she liked seeing somebody that looks like her,
Yeah.
right? But one of the frustrations that Aunt is having is she's not talking to me enough. Like we're not getting results and I don't feel like I'm in the loop with this counseling. So, I mean, how does Aunt go about kind of having that conversation? I mean, should she just try to stick it out with this counselor or should she just try to find a new counselor or, what's your advice there?
Okay, my advice to the aunt and uncle would be that you contact the counselor because my guess is, especially if she's a school social worker, she probably is run thin. And the last thing that enters her head is to reach out and contact you guys and help put you in the loop. And so it's one of those squeaky wheel gets the grease. And
Okay.
that includes even when if you're paying for this as a private counselor, is that if you feel like I'm not getting what I need, say it. Say it to your therapist, say it to your counselor. Give them a chance to see if they'll come around. Do I think it's a huge bonus that this counselor is a person of color? I do.
Mm,
It's hard for kids to have all the people I'm valuing in my world not look like me.
yeah.
Of course, that is. Can kids deal with it? Totally. I have seen many kids of color. That the important thing is that I can recognize. I'll bet it would feel so good if I looked like you, if my skin was your color. And if aunt and uncle could do that, that would be great. Just a little times, just noticing. And then just toss out. And I'll bet sometimes you wish you had white skin like me, you
Mhm.
know? And you can do that. And sometimes, oh, I just wish I had those big, brown eyes. And I'll bet sometimes you wish you had these blue ones so that it gives permission. The issue is if there are feelings that I have and they can't be articulated and no one does, and we dance around them, they tend to go to guilt.
Okay.
And they tend to make me mad. And I tend to feel really bad that I have these.
And I think that's pretty important in Jane's situation because, she is a child of color and primarily, her cousins that she lives with most of the time, they're white, right?
Exactly.
And so, maybe they aren't addressing that or maybe they are just kind of avoiding it. And so, acknowledge that you look different than us. But you know what? The important thing is that we all love each other. Acknowledge that difference, but make sure that the child knows that's not what's important to me. I love you for you. I love the color of your skin and I love you for who you are. And it's okay that you look different. The important point is that I love you and you love me.
Yes, and the key is to not move to soothing too fast, to allow that. I'll bet you really wished you had white skin sometimes and let that sit. Because if I move very quickly, it says, I can't tolerate you having this feeling of longing for this. If I move to, and I love you being brown too quickly.
Okay.
So it's important to just have that be, that we all have things we long for. And you're right, just not soothe it too fast. Then there's another technique that would really help Jane and would help parents across the board. This technique is called magical stories because we all heal through stories. If you look at the Bible is full of stories because, stories heal.
Mm-hmm.
So with kids, it is very, very helpful, especially a kid in Jane's situation, to do what I call magical healing. That would be the aunt and uncle would think of an animal that Jane likes, like maybe it's dogs if she likes dogs, and tell a story about a little puppy dog who used to live with her mommy, but then her mommy left. And this puppy dog went and lived with another family. And you could include things like, and the other family, they all had brown fur and she had white fur or some. And what you want to do in these stories is get to the feelings of the puppy. It's so healing for kids. So you tell a story of a puppy and sometimes she leaves the family she's with to go visit the mom. And when she's with the mom, she really, really likes being with the mom. But when she comes back to the family, she feels really mad at the mom and mad at the family and mad at the world. And so she feels so mad, she doesn't know what to do. So she starts biting everyone's tails or something like that. And you also can include the kid in setting up the story and telling the story because that helps the kid invest in it. And you can even say to the kid, so when the puppy comes back from mommy's house, how do you think the puppy feels? And she might have an answer or she might not. And you can say, and so she went and started biting everyone's tails or she knocked over their lamp. In fact, kids love it when you make the little protagonist really, really naughty, exacerbate it, make it bigger. And then you can say to the kid, what do you think of that? And sometimes they giggle. And then you say, well, did that help fix things? You can play with it, be playful. So then she knocked over the fridge and ate all the food. Do you think that helped her feel better?
Okay.
That kind of thing. Sort of helping her in a not in the moment time, hear about her behaviors helps normalize, helps kids feel better. And then, of course, you find some gentle, soothing ways in the story. So something, like there'll be a lot around belonging. So you figure out a way in your story how this little adopted puppy gets to belong and all through her life gets to play with these cousins and see these people, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever theme you think they're working on this. And then you can tailor this. Kids just love these kind of stories. And it's a really good technique.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. And so I think an overarching theme of today's episode has been validation, right?
Mm.
I mean, kids need to validate, and it can be so hard for everybody to validate, because so often validation to people feels like I agree with you. And so I think oftentimes parents hesitate to validate their kids' big, loud emotions because it feels like parents are saying, I'm okay with this behavior. And that's not what it is. So you're not saying your behavior is acceptable to me. You're saying your emotion is acceptable to me. I can accept that you are feeling this. Let's find a way to help you figure out what to do with all of this energy that you feel because of these emotions. So that kind of sounds like the overarching theme of today's episode.
Oh, so well said, Liz.
All right. So this was fantastic. Again, thank you, Lindy, for doing this with us. Next week, Dr. Burton will be back with us, and we are going to get into boundaries in marriage. So it's going to be a good episode, and we will see you all next week. Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.